Wake up, wake up, wake up.
A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't just another 80s slasher film, it was a revolutionary horror masterpiece born from the literal nightmares of its creator and forged in a crucible of near impossible conditions. The film that launched New Line Cinema, nicknamed The House That Freddy Built, almost never happened. Director Wes Craven, desperate and broke, pitched a movie about teenagers being killed in their dreams to studio after studio, facing rejection at every turn. The cast endured freezing cold shoots in bathtubs full of fake blood. An amateur special effects team created groundbreaking visuals with household materials, and a young Johnny Depp thought he was auditioning for an entirely different movie when he landed his first film role. Behind that iconic striped sweater and razor glove lurks a production story even more disturbing than what appeared on screen. From the real medical condition that inspired Freddy Krueger to the nightmarish special effects that sent one crew member to the hospital, the making of this horror classic pushed everyone involved to their breaking point. Today, I'm revealing 20 weird facts about A Nightmare on Elm Street that will completely change how you see this revolutionary horror film. And stick around until the end for a shocking bonus fact about Freddy Krueger that even the most dedicated fans don't know. Let's dive into the nightmare behind the nightmare. Wes Craven's real-life inspiration came from actual deaths. Freddy Krueger wasn't just a figment of Wes Craven's imagination. He was inspired by a terrifying real-life phenomenon. In the early 1980s, Craven read a series of disturbing articles in the LA Times about Southeast Asian refugees, primarily young men from the Hmong community, who were dying mysteriously in their sleep. These healthy young men would go to bed and never wake up, often after expressing intense fear about falling asleep. Medical examiners were baffled, finding no cause of death. The condition, later named Sudden Unexpected Nocturnal Death Syndrome, SUNS, claimed dozens of lives. What struck Craven wasn't just the mysterious deaths, but the victims' overwhelming terror of sleep itself. Some families reported finding coffee cups hidden around victims' rooms, desperate attempts to stay awake at all costs. One young man had even placed a coffee pot in his bathroom and wedged a chair under his bedroom doorknob before finally succumbing to exhaustion. Here were these men in their 20s who were absolutely convinced that if they went to sleep, they'd die, Craven later explained. And then they did. That struck me as the most frightening thing I'd ever heard. Every major studio rejected the screenplay. A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't an easy sell. It wasn't a conventional slasher. It was a mind-bending horror that blurred the lines between dreams and reality. Wes Craven, already struggling financially after several film disappointments, took his script to every major studio in Hollywood. Universal, Paramount, Columbia, they all passed. Executives couldn't wrap their heads around the concept or feared the budget requirements for the ambitious dream sequences. Disney executives reportedly called the concept disgusting after reading the script. One studio head told Craven point blank, "Nobody wants to see movies about dreams. Dreams are boring." The rejection was so universal that Craven nearly abandoned filmmaking altogether, considering a return to teaching. The script finally landed at New Line Cinema, a tiny independent distributor that had never produced a feature film before. Founder Robert Shea was operating out of a fifth-floor walk-up office in New York City, primarily distributing foreign art films to college campuses. He immediately saw the potential in Craven's nightmare vision, mortgaging his own apartment and scraping together the $1.8 million budget to make it happen. That desperate gamble didn't just create a horror classic, it built the foundation of a studio that would eventually produce the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Johnny Depp's casting was pure coincidence. Johnny Depp wasn't supposed to be in A Nightmare on Elm Street. He wasn't even an actor yet. The 21-year-old musician had accompanied his friend Jackie Earle Haley, who would ironically play Freddy in the 2010 remake, to the audition as moral support with no intention of trying out himself. Depp had zero acting experience and was focused entirely on his rock band, What happened next has become Hollywood legend. Director Wes Craven's 14-year-old daughter and her friend happened to be in the casting room flipping through headshots. When they spotted Depp sitting in the waiting area, they pulled his photo from a stack of submissions and insisted their dad consider him. Craven, amused by their teenage crush, asked Depp if he'd like to read for the part of Glenn. Depp, completely unprepared, reluctantly agreed. Despite having never acted before, his natural charisma and distinctive look impressed Craven immediately. The director later confessed, "I didn't know actors from non-actors at that point, but Johnny just had something, this face that the camera absolutely loved." The irony? Haley, the actual actor who brought Depp to the audition, was rejected for the role that eventually launched Depp's legendary career. The iconic glove was designed to trigger primal fear. Freddy's glove wasn't just a random weapon choice. It was meticulously designed by Wes Craven to tap into humanity's most primal fears. Craven spent months researching what weapon would be most disturbing to audiences on a subconscious level. Not a knife, not an axe. Something more visceral and evolutionary. The answer came from the animal kingdom. Craven discovered that the three predators humans have evolved to fear most are big cats, birds of prey, and carnivorous dinosaurs, all creatures with long, sharp claws. The glove design deliberately mimicked these natural weapons, creating an instant, instinctive fear response in viewers. The actual construction process was surprisingly low budget. Special effects designer Jim Doyle built the prototype using steak knives purchased at a local hardware store, a gardening glove, and sheet metal cut with tin snips. The first version was so heavy and unwieldy that actor Robert Englund could barely lift his hand. After multiple iterations, they finally created the streamlined, iconic weapon that could slice through walls and teenagers with terrifying ease. Englund later revealed, "When I first put that glove on, something happened to my body language. I immediately hunched over. My voice dropped. Something primal took over." The revolving room scene caused cast and crew injuries. The iconic scene where Tina is dragged up the wall and across the ceiling wasn't CGI. It was an engineering feat that nearly broke the cast and crew. To achieve the effect, production designer Greg Fonseca constructed an entire bedroom that rotated like a giant barrel, powered by an industrial motor previously used in airplane manufacturing. The room was actually built inside a hulking metal framework that could complete a full 360-degree rotation. While the camera remained fixed to the set's floor, the room itself turned completely upside down, creating the illusion that actress Amanda Weiss was being dragged up walls and across the ceiling by an invisible force. The physical toll was brutal. Weiss was harnessed to the bed with painful steel cables digging into her torso. As the room rotated, crew members had to scramble to secure equipment before it crashed down. One cameraman suffered a broken rib when a light fixture broke loose during filming. The fake blood, which had to flow up the walls, was pumped through hidden tubes at high pressure, frequently clogging or bursting. After one particularly rough take, Weiss emerged bruised and bleeding from the harness cuts. When asked if she needed a break, she reportedly said, "No way. My pain is nothing compared to what this girl is experiencing. Let's keep going." Robert Englund was never the first choice for Freddy. Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger is horror film royalty, but shockingly, he wasn't even on the original casting list. Wes Craven initially wanted British actor David Warner, who played villains in Time Bandits and Tron, for the role. Warner actually completed early makeup tests before scheduling conflicts forced him to drop out just weeks before filming. The studio then pushed for someone with more star power. Their top choice? Comedian David Bowie, whose eerie performance in The Hunger had executives convinced he could bring an otherworldly quality to Krueger. When Bowie passed, they considered a parade of unlikely candidates, including Willem Dafoe and even Alice Cooper. Englund, primarily known for playing the gentle alien Willie in the sci-fi series V, heard about the role from his agent. having just lost several film parts. He was desperate enough to drive through Los Angeles rush hour traffic for a last-minute audition. He arrived sleep-deprived and irritable, perfect for Freddie's menacing demeanor. During his audition, instead of simply reading the lines, Englund crouched in a corner of the room, contorted his body, and delivered his dialogue while slowly dragging his nails against the wall. The room fell silent. Craven immediately offered him the part, later saying, "Robert didn't just read Freddie, he became him right before our eyes." The makeup process was torture for Englund. Becoming Freddy Krueger wasn't just acting, it was physical endurance. Robert Englund's transformation required 5 hours of makeup application every morning before filming could begin. The process was so grueling that Englund had to arrive at 1 a.m. for scenes scheduled to shoot after sunrise. The original makeup design by David Miller used over 8 prosthetic pieces adhered to Englund's face, head, and body with a powerful adhesive that frequently tore skin when removed. The burn scars were created using collodion, a chemical that contracts as it dries, physically pulling Englund's skin to create a realistic burn tissue appearance. The application was extremely painful, with Englund describing the sensation as having your face caught in a car door. The full costume was equally punishing. Englund wore 3 layers, a protective base layer, the foam latex prosthetics, and finally the grimy sweater and pants. Unable to sweat normally through the makeup, he suffered frequent heat exhaustion on set. During one summer day of filming, the temperature inside his costume reached 126 degrees, and Englund collapsed between takes. Most difficult was the simple human need to eat. A small mouth hole was left in the prosthetics, but Englund could only consume liquids through a straw. For the entire production, his diet consisted primarily of eggnog, orange juice, and coffee, all consumed through a cocktail straw. The infamous blood geyser malfunctioned catastrophically. The scene of Johnny Depp being swallowed by his bed and ejected as a geyser of blood was meant to be shocking, but not nearly as shocking as what actually happened on set. The practical effect required a replica of Depp's room to be built, flipped upside down, and filled with nearly 500 gallons of fake blood that would fall upward when released. What no one anticipated was the immense pressure created by that volume of liquid. When the trapdoors opened for the first take, the mechanism malfunctioned. Instead of the controlled spray shown in the film, the entire blood reserve exploded through the bed with fire hose force, hitting the ceiling of the soundstage with such impact that it damaged the lighting grid. The deluge shorted out multiple electrical systems, creating a genuine risk of electrocution for crew members standing in the rapidly flooding set. The fake blood, a mixture of corn syrup, red dye, and peanut butter for thickness, poured through the soundstage floor into the set below, where another production was filming. Special effects coordinator Jim Doyle was briefly hospitalized after being knocked unconscious by falling equipment dislodged by the geyser's force. The cleanup required 3 days, nearly shutting down the production that was already behind schedule. Craven later called it the single most chaotic day of my filmmaking career, while Depp joked that the scene gave him a lifelong fear of waterbeds. Freddy's sweater colors were chosen based on scientific research. Freddy's iconic red and green striped sweater wasn't a random costume choice. It was psychological warfare on the audience. Wes Craven, who studied psychology before becoming a filmmaker, deliberately selected those specific colors after reading scientific research about color combinations that disturb the human eye. According to the studies Craven consulted, red and green positioned directly adjacent to each other create an unsettling visual vibration when viewed. This clashing combination is the most difficult for human eyes to process simultaneously, creating a subtle but persistent visual discomfort in viewers, even if they don't consciously notice it. The sweater's worn, stretched appearance added another layer of disquiet. Costume designer Patricia Marcus purchased a brand new sweater, then deliberately damaged it, running it over with cars in the studio parking lot and washing it with rocks and bleach to create its distressed appearance. Multiple versions were created with slightly different stripe widths and spacing. After screen tests, Craven selected the pattern that created the most visual tension when Freddy moved quickly through dark environments. The director later explained, "I wanted something that would remain subtly unsettling throughout the film, even when he wasn't doing anything threatening. Something about him should always be fundamentally wrong." The film's tiny budget led to dangerous shortcuts. Hey, if you're enjoying these dark secrets behind one of horror's most influential films, go ahead and like and subscribe because we're just getting to the really shocking stuff. The blood, sweat, and near-death experiences behind this movie will make you see it in a whole new light. A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't just made on a shoestring budget, it was made on a frayed, unraveling shoestring that constantly threatened to snap. With just $1.8 million to create ambitious dream sequences and complex special effects, corners weren't just cut, they were eliminated entirely. The most dangerous compromise involved the boiler room scenes. Unable to afford a proper soundstage, production designer Greg Fonseca located an abandoned boiler room in a condemned power plant scheduled for demolition. The facility contained asbestos, lead paint, and unstable flooring, hazards the production simply couldn't afford to address properly. The steam filling these scenes wasn't created by special effects, it was actual steam from partially functioning pipes that would unpredictably release scalding vapor. Actor Heather Langenkamp suffered minor burns during one chase sequence. The tetanus shots required for the cast and crew actually consumed nearly 2% of the film's entire medical budget. Even worse, the electrical systems used for lighting these scenes were jury-rigged through the building's decaying wiring, creating multiple fire hazards and electrical shock risks. One crew member was hospitalized after receiving a severe electrical shock while adjusting a light fixture. Production was nearly shut down when a fire marshal made a surprise inspection, only continuing after producer Robert Shea personally bribed the official, a desperate measure he later called the price of getting this film made. Heather Langenkamp performed her own dangerous stunts. Nancy Thompson became an iconic final girl thanks to Heather Langenkamp's gritty performance, but few know how physically demanding and genuinely dangerous the role was. Unlike modern productions with safety protocols and stunt doubles, Langenkamp performed virtually all her stunts herself, resulting in numerous injuries throughout filming. The scene where Nancy runs up the booby-trapped staircase required Langenkamp to sprint across steps rigged with collapsing panels. During one take, a mechanism triggered prematurely, causing her to fall through the staircase and gash her leg on exposed framework below. Rather than seeking medical attention, Langenkamp allowed the makeup team to incorporate her actual bleeding wound into the scene. The bathtub sequence presented even greater risks. Filmed in midwinter in an unheated warehouse, Langenkamp spent hours submerged in cold water that continually dropped in temperature as filming progressed. Between takes, crew members had to break ice forming on the water's surface. Langenkamp later developed hypothermia symptoms but refused to halt production. Perhaps most shocking was the scene where Nancy is attacked through her bed. The mechanical arms grabbing her were operated by crew members below without any precise control system. During one take, the metal armature malfunctioned, nearly crushing Langenkamp's ribcage before technicians could power down the device. She later revealed, "There were no safety meetings, no stunt coordinators, just a bunch of young filmmakers trying to create something frightening, regardless of the physical cost." New Line. Cinema nearly went bankrupt during production. A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't just a financial gamble for New Line Cinema, it was existential roulette. The tiny distribution company had never produced a feature film before, and founder Robert Shea secured the $1.8 million budget by essentially betting everything, mortgaging his New York apartment, maxing out multiple credit cards, and bringing in foreign investors with promises of guaranteed returns. Midway through production, the money ran out completely. For nearly 2 weeks, filming continued without anyone being paid. Crew members worked for deferred payments or simple IOUs written on paper napkins. Some cast members allowed Shea to delay their already modest salaries just to keep cameras rolling. The financial situation became so dire that the film's negative, the actual physical film containing all the shot footage, was nearly seized by creditors multiple times. On several occasions, Shea had to physically move the film reels between different processing labs to prevent them from being confiscated over unpaid bills. When the first rough cut was completed, New Line couldn't even afford to create screening prints for distributors. They resorted to showing potential buyers the unfinished work print on a portable projector in hotel rooms during film markets. The production's financial strain was so severe that when filming finally wrapped, the wrap party consisted of pizza and beer in the unfinished editing room, with Shea personally apologizing to the team for the lack of celebration. The script was secretly autobiographical for Craven. Beneath the supernatural horror, A Nightmare on Elm Street contains deeply personal elements from Wes Craven's own childhood. The film wasn't just inspired by Hmong's sleep deaths, it was shaped by Craven's strict Baptist upbringing and childhood traumas he rarely discussed publicly. Freddy Krueger's character was partially based on a real person, a frightening homeless man who scared Craven as a child. Young Wes, living in a Cleveland apartment, was startled awake one night by a strange man staring through his bedroom window. This man, dressed in a shabby hat and coat, locked eyes with the boy before slowly walking away. The encounter left such an impression that Craven incorporated the stranger's silhouette and menacing presence into Krueger's design. The film's setting of Elm Street was no accident either. Craven grew up on an Elm Street in a strict religious household where discussions of fear were forbidden. His parents taught him that nightmares were sinful, the result of immoral thoughts. This suppression of normal childhood fears created a pressure cooker of anxiety that Craven would later channel into his films. Most revealing was Nancy's character arc. Her journey, being disbelieved by authority figures, forced to find her own solutions, and ultimately confronting her fears directly, mirrored Craven's own emotional development. He later admitted, "Nancy was the person I wanted to be, someone brave enough to face the things that terrified them instead of repressing them as I had been taught." The film's ambiguous ending sparked a bitter creative dispute. The jarring, dreamlike ending of A Nightmare on Elm Street, with the convertible driving off with the trapped teenagers and Freddy pulling Nancy's mother through the door window, wasn't Craven's original vision. It was the result of one of the most contentious creative battles in horror film history. Craven's original ending was far more optimistic. After Nancy turns her back on Freddy, draining him of power, she would emerge into actual daylight. The nightmare would truly be over, with Freddy defeated by Nancy's realization that fear itself gave him strength. This conclusion aligned with Craven's desire to create a feminist horror narrative, where the female protagonist triumphs through intelligence rather than luck or rescue. Studio head Robert Shea hated this ending. With the 1980s sequel-driven market in mind, Shea demanded a shock twist that would leave the door open for future installments. The dispute became so heated that Craven nearly walked off the project entirely. Ultimately, with the production already over budget and behind schedule, Craven reluctantly filmed Shea's preferred ending. The compromise deeply wounded Craven, who felt the changed ending undermined the film's entire thematic structure. Years later, he would describe the alteration as a violation of the story's internal logic. This creative control battle left such bitter feelings that Craven refused involvement in any of the immediate sequels, only returning to the franchise years later for New Nightmare, where he could explore his original themes with more creative control. The film's release was sabotaged by its own distributor. When A Nightmare on Elm Street was finally completed, the battle to get it in front of audiences was just beginning. Despite being the film's producer, New Line Cinema's inexperience as a distributor nearly killed the movie's chances of success. The tiny company lacked the resources for a proper marketing campaign, initially releasing the film in only a handful of theaters. The situation worsened when New Line's print delivery system broke down completely. Several theaters received their film reels late, while others received incomplete copies missing entire scenes. In one notorious incident, a Midwestern theater received reels for the middle of the film, but not the opening or conclusion, resulting in thoroughly confused audiences. Most damaging was New Line's failure to coordinate with theater owners. The company had promised midnight showings to capitalize on the horror audience, but failed to notify theaters in time to schedule staff. Several locations canceled opening weekend showings entirely when employees didn't show up to operate projectors. Critics had difficulty reviewing the film because New Line couldn't afford to host proper press screenings. Many early reviews were based on watching incomplete work prints in makeshift screening rooms with folding chairs. The New York Times reviewer famously watched the film in New Line's office with the sound coming through a single desk speaker. Despite these catastrophic distribution problems, word of mouth about the film's innovative premise spread quickly. Weekend box office doubled in the second week, an almost unheard of performance that saved both the film and the studio from financial ruin. Freddy's limited screen time was a financial necessity. Freddy Krueger appears on screen for less than 7 minutes in the entire film, a creative decision born from brutal financial necessity. The complex makeup effects for Freddy cost approximately $5,000 per day to execute, consuming nearly 8% of the film's entire budget for each day. Robert Englund appeared in full costume. This financial constraint forced Wes Craven to completely rethink how to present his villain. Rather than showing Freddy directly, Craven used shadow, reflection, and partial glimpses to suggest his presence. The approach inadvertently created the film's signature dreamlike atmosphere where threats lurk just outside the frame. The financial limitation extended to the dream sequences as well. Unable to afford elaborate sets for nightmare worlds, Craven used practical camera tricks and simple physical effects. The famous sequence where Freddy's arms extend to impossible lengths was achieved using crude extendable poles with gloves attached, operated by crew members lying on the floor just out of frame. Craven turned this budgetary weakness into a storytelling strength, establishing a visual language where what isn't shown becomes more terrifying than what is. This approach proved so effective that later sequels, despite larger budgets that allowed for more Freddy screen time, were often criticized for showing too much and losing the original's atmospheric dread. The irony wasn't lost on Craven, who noted years later, "Sometimes having no money forces you to find the scariest place of all, the audience's imagination." Several scenes were filmed after the movie was technically finished. When test audiences saw the first cut of A Nightmare on Elm Street, their reaction was troubling. The film wasn't scary enough. Despite a compelling concept, viewers reported that the limited dream sequences and practical effects failed to deliver the visceral fear the premise promised. This feedback created a crisis for the production that had already exhausted its budget. Desperate to salvage the film, Wes Craven and Robert Shaye made an extraordinary decision. They would secretly film additional scenes without studio approval, funding the extra shooting days out of their own pockets. For 2 weekends, a skeleton crew of loyal production members worked for no pay, adding crucial nightmare footage that would define the film. The iconic sequence where Freddy pushes through the wall above Nancy's bed was shot in Craven's garage using a spandex sheet and dramatic lighting. The memorable image of body bags in the school hallway was filmed in an actual high school during a Sunday when the building was closed with crew members' children playing the murdered students. Most significantly, Tina's ceiling death scene, now considered one of horror cinema's most iconic kills, was substantially expanded during these guerrilla shooting sessions. The original version showed far less of her supernatural trajectory through the room. After seeing audience reaction cards demanding more spectacular deaths, Craven shot additional footage of Amanda Weiss being dragged across the ceiling using his own living room with furniture bolted upside down. These unauthorized additions transformed the film from an interesting concept into a landmark horror experience, all created without the financial backing that would typically support such ambitious sequences. The film's music score was created in just 2 days. The haunting soundtrack of A Nightmare on Elm Street, with its eerie lullaby motif and dissonant synthesizer work, wasn't crafted over months by a full orchestra. It was hastily composed in a 48-hour marathon session by composer Charles Bernstein, working almost entirely alone with limited equipment. When the film was nearly complete, the producers realized they had no money left for a proper score. In a desperate move, they approached Bernstein, who had previously scored several B-movies, with an unusual offer: a flat fee of $6,000, no residuals, and just 1 weekend to create the entire soundtrack. Bernstein, intrigued by the film's concept, agreed. Working with only a 4-track recorder, a primitive synthesizer, and a damaged piano in his home studio, Bernstein composed and recorded the entire score without sleeping. The film's signature theme, the chilling 1-2 Freddy's Coming for You nursery rhyme, was performed by Bernstein's daughter and neighborhood children recorded in his backyard. The metallic scraping sounds that accompany Freddy's appearances were created by Bernstein dragging a fork across the inside of his damaged piano. The score was delivered just hours before the final sound mix was scheduled. Craven, hearing it for the first time during the mixing session, was so impressed that he immediately recut several scenes to better match Bernstein's atmospheric compositions. What began as a budget-saving measure became one of the film's most distinctive elements. Bernstein's minimalist electronic score, created under impossible constraints, established a sonic template that influenced horror soundtracks for decades to follow. The infamous Fred Krueger. Child molester controversy. When A Nightmare on Elm Street was initially conceived, Freddy Krueger wasn't just a child killer, he was explicitly written as a child molester. Early drafts of the script contained direct references to sexual abuse, and several dream sequences included disturbing imagery suggesting Freddy's pedophilic nature. The character's full name, Frederick Charles Krueger, was even inspired by real-life child killer Charles Frederick Schmid. As production progressed, a series of high-profile child abuse cases dominated American headlines, including the McMartin preschool trial. Suddenly, the film's villain concept seemed too uncomfortably real. Studio executives, fearing audience backlash and potential boycotts, pressured Craven to remove all explicit references to sexual abuse from the script. Craven, while agreeing to tone down the most explicit elements, insisted on maintaining the subtext. The compromise resulted in Freddy being described only as a child killer in the dialogue, while visual cues, like his lair in the school boiler room and his tendency to invade teenage bedrooms, preserved the predatory undertones. This last-minute character revision created strange inconsistencies in the film. Nancy's mother refers to filthy things Krueger did, without elaboration. The parents' vigilante justice seems disproportionately extreme for a suspected murderer who hadn't been convicted, suggesting deeper, unspoken crimes. These subtle hints remained largely unnoticed by casual viewers, but created an additional layer of discomfort for attentive audiences, exactly as Craven intended. He later explained, "The most frightening monsters are those that could exist in our world, committing acts too terrible to name explicitly." The film created a real-world sleep disorder in viewers. In a disturbing case of life imitating art, A Nightmare on Elm Street didn't just portray sleep terror, it created it. Following the film's release, sleep researchers documented a significant increase in patients reporting a specific pattern of sleep disturbance that came to be informally known as the Freddy effect. Psychiatrists at several major universities recorded hundreds of cases where previously healthy individuals, after viewing the film, developed intense anxiety about falling asleep. Many reported delaying sleep until complete exhaustion, similar to the film's characters. Most troubling were reports of individuals experiencing sleep paralysis, a natural but frightening phenomenon where a person awakens mentally while their body remains immobilized during REM sleep for the first time after watching the movie. Dr. Francis Thorpe, director of the Sleep-Wake Disorders Center in New York, documented over 70 cases directly linked to the film. Patients described hallucinating a presence in their room during episodes of sleep paralysis, with several specifically reporting a figure resembling Freddy Krueger. The phenomenon was particularly prevalent among adolescents, the film's target demographic. One case study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry detailed a 16-year-old who developed such severe sleep anxiety after viewing the film that he required hospitalization after remaining awake for nearly 112 hours. His treatment included cognitive behavioral therapy specifically designed to disconnect dream content from the film's imagery. While most cases resolved naturally within weeks, the film's ability to infiltrate viewers' actual dream lives demonstrated its unprecedented psychological impact. As sleep researcher Dr. Carlos Schenk noted, few cultural products have ever so directly affected the sleep architecture of an entire generation. The most shocking secret about Freddy Krueger? The iconic villain we know almost looked completely different. Makeup artist David Miller spent 3 months creating an elaborate, original design for Freddy, featuring translucent skin that revealed exposed muscle tissue and visible blood vessels beneath. The concept included mechanical components that would allow pulsing veins to visibly throb when Englund was in character. This revolutionary design, which would have required nearly 8 hours of daily application, was meticulously crafted as a single master mold from which all subsequent appliances would be created. Just 1 week before filming began, disaster struck. A studio janitor unfamiliar with the special effects workshop mistook the irreplaceable mold for trash and disposed of it. With no time to recreate the complex design and the budget already strained, Miller was forced to improvise an emergency alternative in just 72 hours. Working through 3 sleepless nights, he created the simpler, more streamlined burn victim appearance that would become one of cinema's most recognizable villains. The mistake proved fortuitous. Test audiences later indicated that the simplified design was actually more effective. The detailed original concept, while technically impressive, potentially revealed too much, diminishing Freddy's mysterious quality. As Robert Englund later reflected, sometimes the most terrifying things come from happy accidents. Freddy became iconic not despite the last-minute design, but because of it. A Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't just a horror film, it was a cultural watershed that forever changed our relationship with sleep itself. Born from real medical mysteries, crafted through near-impossible production challenges, and created by filmmakers willing to risk everything, the film transcended its humble origins to become something truly revolutionary. The nightmare behind the nightmare, the struggles, the accidents, the compromises, created a perfect alchemy that could never be replicated, not even in the franchise's many sequels. It wasn't just about a man with knives for fingers. It was about the vulnerability we all experience when we close our eyes, the universal fear of what lurks in our subconscious, and the thin line between dreams and reality. So the next time you find yourself fighting sleep, wondering what might be waiting in your dreams, remember this: The real horror of Elm Street wasn't what appeared on screen, it was the extraordinary human story of determination behind every frame. If you enjoyed these shocking revelations, make sure to hit subscribe for more deep dives into the dark secrets behind your favorite films, sweet dreams, or should I say nightmares.